Imagine waking up in total darkness. Stone walls pressing in from every side. No windows. No sunlight. No idea whether it is morning or midnight. And the worst part, no one outside these walls even knows you exist anymore. That was the reality for thousands of men and women who passed through the iron gates of one of history's most forbidden places. Not a battlefield, not a war zone, a prison, a system, a machine designed with terrifying precision to erase human beings without leaving a single trace. They did not die quickly. That would have been too merciful. Instead, they were broken, piece by piece. Their names were taken, their identities stripped, their families told nothing. Some waited for years in cells so small they could not fully stand. Others were moved in the dead of night to locations that did not appear on any official map. History tried to bury this place, and for a long time, it almost succeeded. But buried things have a way of surfacing. Documents survive. Survivors speak. And the silence that once protected this prison is now the very thing that damns it. You are about to enter a world most people never knew existed. A prison so deliberately hidden from public knowledge that even mentioning its name was once considered a crime. A place where thousands walked through the gates, and virtually no one ever walked back out. What happened inside those walls is not just history, it is a warning. The facility did not look like a place of horror from the outside. That was part of the design, nestled within a landscape that swallowed secrets. Remote, surrounded by wilderness and silence, it presented itself as a correctional institution, a government facility, something administrative, bureaucratic, forgettable. But the people sent here were not ordinary criminals. They were political prisoners, dissidents, teachers, writers, priests, farmers, anyone the regime considered dangerous. And the definition of dangerous was terrifyingly broad. You could be arrested for an overheard conversation, for a book found in your home, for the company of the wrong friend. The prison operated under a system of deliberate anonymity. New arrivals had their names replaced with numbers. Photographs were forbidden. Letters home were censored beyond recognition, or simply never sent at all. To the outside world, these people had vanished. Officially, many were listed as relocated, transferred, under investigation. The paperwork was designed to confuse. The bureaucracy was weaponized. Guards were selected not just for physical strength, but for their capacity to follow orders without question. Empathy was considered a liability. Any guard who showed mercy risked becoming a prisoner himself. Cruelty was not a side effect of the system, it was a requirement. And then came the detail that survivors would later describe as the most psychologically devastating of all. New prisoners were told, on arrival, that no one was looking for them. Their families had been warned not to ask questions. Their names had been removed from official records. As far as the state was concerned, they had never existed at all. The methods used inside this prison were not accidental. They were engineered, researched, refined over years, with one singular goal: to destroy a human mind without leaving visible marks on the body. Sleep deprivation was among the first tools deployed. Prisoners were woken at random intervals throughout the night. Lights remained on constantly. The concept of time was deliberately erased. Without day and night, without routine, the human mind begins to fracture. Guards understood this. They exploited it with clinical precision. Food was weaponized next. Rations were calculated, not to nourish, but to keep prisoners just functional enough to remain useful for forced labor. Hunger became a permanent companion. Prisoners described dreaming obsessively about bread, about warmth, about the sound of another human voice that was not delivering an order or an interrogation. The interrogations themselves were a category of terror entirely their own. They could last hours, days. Prisoners were questioned about crimes they did not commit, forced to sign confessions written for them in advance. Some broke quickly, Others held out for weeks, months. But the system was patient. It had time. The prisoners did not. And then came the detail that redefines everything you think you know about this place. The prison kept records. Meticulous, detailed, bureaucratic records of every prisoner who entered. Names, numbers, alleged crimes, interrogation dates. These records were meant to be destroyed. But in the chaos of the regime's eventual collapse, a portion survived. What those records revealed was staggering. Of the thousands who passed through the gates during the peak years of operation, fewer than 3% are documented as having been released. The others, their files end with a single word, a stamp, a code that investigators would spend years learning to interpret. It meant transferred to an unknown location. It meant not coming back. Incident. It meant erased. When the regime fell, the prison did not fall with it immediately. Those in power understood that what had happened inside those walls could not survive public exposure. In the final weeks, files were burned, cells were scrubbed. Some buildings were demolished entirely, but they did not finish the job. A small group of surviving prisoners, gaunt, traumatized, blinking in unfamiliar light, emerged and began to speak. Their testimonies were fragmented, understandably so. Years of psychological destruction had fractured their ability to construct linear memory, but the fragments matched. The stories aligned. Investigators listened, documented, and followed the trail. What followed was one of history's most painstaking truth recovery efforts. International human rights organizations spent years cross-referencing survivor testimony against the partial records that had survived the purge. Forensic teams were brought in. Former guards, some elderly, some dying, were interviewed. A small number confessed. Most did not. Justice, when it came, was incomplete. Several senior officials were tried and convicted, but many of those most directly responsible had already died. Others had vanished into new identities, new countries, new lives. The machine that had destroyed thousands went largely unpunished. The prison site itself became a point of fierce national debate. Some called for it to be demolished entirely, arguing that preserving the structure was a form of honoring the horror. Others argued that demolition would be another act of erasure, that the walls themselves were evidence, that the place must stand so that no future generation could pretend it never happened. Today, the location exists in that contested space, part memorial, part wound. Visitors who walk through it describe a feeling that is difficult to articulate, not just sadness, something heavier, a sense that the air itself remembers what was done here. And the names of the victims, most of them, are still unknown. What this place teaches us is not comfortable. It does not resolve neatly into a lesson with clear villains and obvious heroes. The people who built this system were not monsters from another world. They were bureaucrats, guards, officials who signed papers, followed procedures, and told themselves they were doing what was necessary. That is the most terrifying truth of all. Systems of erasure do not require evil. They require only obedience, silence, and the quiet decision made by enough people to look away. The prisoners who survived carried their experience forward like a burden no one had asked them to carry, but they carried it anyway, because they understood, with absolute clarity, what happens when history is allowed to bury its own crimes. So we carry it too, not as spectators, as witnesses. If what you just heard unsettled you, if it stayed with you, then it has done exactly what history is supposed to do. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And if you believe these buried stories deserve to be heard, subscribe, because this is not the last place that tried to vanish from memory, and we are not finished.